Good evening to all our Facebook friends and family who've been tuning in and watching my son, Wilkie S. Frieson, in his Facebook Live Voter Education and Empowerment video presentations on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. These workshop-styled encounters have been curated by my family and I, courtesy of the Clark Historic Landmark Site located here in the historic East Roanoke community in rural Randolph County, Alabama. Those of you who are familiar with us are aware that the Clark Historic Landmark Site and Clark Memorial Funeral Service in Roanoke actually occupy the same property. And our purpose for presenting these encounters is to amplify the life and works of my parents, the late Wilkie Clark, and his wife and business partner, the late Mrs. Hattie Lee Peters Clark, who were dedicated advocates for black civil rights here in Randolph County and beyond. For several years, we have worked to document their rich history as civil rights pioneers in our area, as well as community leaders, educators, entrepreneurs, and defenders of whatever they believe to be fair, just, and righteous. Hasn't my son been doing a wonderful job curating and presenting this information? The reason why I am speaking over his video tonight is because we discovered that for about the first 10 minutes of his live video broadcast, his mic was not on. And so you actually don't hear anything until later when he is informed that his mic is muted. So he literally has to start the presentation over. So if you want to get into his presentation, you can go ahead and advance this video to about the 10-minute mark, and then you'll reach the point where he realizes his mic is off. And then you can hear the rest of the presentation. We want to thank each of you for your interest in what we are trying to do here with our historic site. We invite you to continue paying attention to the message. We started with black voting rights because we realized this is one of the most critical aspects of black life, not just in Alabama, but nationwide, and it has been continually under attack. We hope you aren't just paying attention to what we are trying to say, but that you will make a decision to take action, not next year or next election, but right now. Please continue to watch our platforms and visit our website. And remember, we love you, one and all.
which is now essentially useless. Did you take it from the top? Oh boy. Okay. Okay. So I've just been informed that my mic may not have been on. So I'm gonna quickly go back and recap some of this information that I've gone over. But so basically we were talking about the Voting Rights Act, and we were talking about the crime of the death of the Voting Rights Act. And we were talking about voting in general, which was established through the Constitution of the United States, established in the Constitution, Article 1, Sections 2 and 4, Article 2, Section 1, and I spoke about voting being expanded with the 14th and 15th Amendments, which concerned freed slaves, providing freed slaves right to due process, and ensuring the 15th Amendment, ensuring the right to vote should not be infringed. The right to vote should not be infringed. Then we spoke about the 17th and 19th Amendment. 17th Amendment, which refers to the senators being elected by the people in their jurisdictions, and the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, and the right to vote again expanded with the 23rd Amendment for the District of Columbia so that they could vote for presidential candidates. The 24th Amendment outlawed poll taxes, and the voting age was reduced to the age of 18 with the 26th Amendment. And all of this was promised in the Constitution, established. Voting is a part of the democratic process established and promised in the Constitution. And that's part of our social contract because we follow the laws of this country. That's the deal that we make. We follow the laws of the country. We elect our leaders. Voting is part of the equation. That's part of the deal. And you can't separate voting from the process. Now, the whole idea behind this video is we're going to investigate this crime of the death of the Voting Rights Act. Because it was a crime, the death of the Voting Rights Act, and we've got our crime scene here, and we got our poor guy laid out here. And that's our Voting Rights Act. So our Voting Rights Act was protection. It protected our voting rights. Now, it didn't just protect Black people's voting rights. It protects everybody's voting rights. So that's women's voting rights. That's Hispanic voting rights. That's white people voting rights. That's women's voting rights. That's everybody's voting rights, not just African Americans. Everybody's civil rights are everybody's rights. And here are some of the key points for the Voting Rights Act, which was it abolished tests. And we spoke about time in Jim Crow times. People who came to register to vote, African Americans who tried to register to vote, were given insane, ridiculous tests, such as how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, how many marbles are in a jar. Silly tests were given to Black people to dissuade them and try to prevent them from registering to vote. Poll taxes were charged, which they couldn't pay. Grandfather clauses and other means were used in the Jim Crow states to prevent Black people from voting. And the Voting Rights Act banned all of those tests. Also, the Attorney General appointed examiners to register voters in discriminatory jurisdictions. The pre-clearance rule required approval from the federal government prior to changing voting laws or changing district lines. And also language requirements requiring voting materials in multiple languages. So the Voting Rights Act protects the voting rights of everyone. Even though, yes, it did have a great effect for African Americans, it protects everybody's rights. Now we're going to touch on some of the key parts of the Voting Rights Act, Voting Rights Section 2, which bans any qualification standards or practice that restricts or infringes voting rights. It applies to any state, county, or local government. Anywhere that is discriminating against voters or suppressing voters, the Voting Rights Act applied. Lawsuits under the Voting Rights Act could be filed by any private citizen or federal government. So that means anyone has right to sue under the Voting Rights Act. Let's look at Section 4. A coverage formula was used to identify jurisdictions that discriminate and suppress voting. And this is important. This coverage formula basically was used to provide or produce the evidence of voter suppression. Because if you wanted to go to court, you needed evidence, and this formula was applied and used to demonstrate and provide the evidence numbers to be used as evidence of voter suppression. Also, Voting Rights Section 4 bans the tests, marbles in a jar, bubbles in a bar of soap, bans those tests. And this formula was struck down by the Supreme Court in Shelby v. Holder case in 2013. So Section 4, the coverage formula was struck down. All right, moving on to Section 5 is your pre-clearance rule. And this is where I was before I figured out my mic was off. Your pre-clearance rule required certain jurisdictions to get federal approval prior to making changes to voting laws or district lines. And this was very, very, very important, because in the Jim Crow states such as Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina, all of the Jim Crow states had a reputation for gerrymandering voting districts and doing other things to suppress minority voters and prevent them from having minority districts and representation in the legislatures. So the pre-clearance rule prevents that by requiring those jurisdictions to get approval before changing voting district lines or changing their voting laws. And this was also gutted by Supreme Court decision, Shelby v. Holder. And we're going to talk about Shelby v. Holder in just a minute. And next, we're going to talk about Voting Rights Section 3. And this allows the court to place jurisdictions under the Section 5 requirements if they are found to be discriminatory. Now, here's the problem with Section 3. With Section 4 and Section 2 and Section 5, with key provisions essentially gutted, Voting Rights Section 3, you can't do anything. You can't do anything. How can the court place a jurisdiction under Section 5 requirements if you can't use the formula to produce the evidence of voter suppression, and you can't do anything about voting district lines? So Section 3 becomes useless. It doesn't work without the other two sections. So now that's essentially useless. And our Voting Rights Act, basically, we're back on the crime scene. Voting rights, it is essentially dead. Because you can't use the formula to even find the voter suppression or discriminatory practice, and you can't control the voting district lines. So you've got, you have no recourse. And that's why I said voting rights is dead, and that's why we're going to investigate this as a crime. because it is a crime, because it's your Voting Rights Act that have been impacted. And that brings me to this brings me to victim number 2. The Voting Rights Act was victim number 1, but the Voting Rights Act was protecting your voting rights. So this is us. This is me. This is you. This is me. This is you. This is your brother. This is your sister. This is your children. This is your grandchildren. The voting rights of everyone has been affected, and your recourse, your right, have been reduced. Now you might not feel it right now. It might not seem so bad right now, but damage has been done, and you are a victim. So this is all of us. This is us. And then we're back on our crime scene. So let's look at some of the evidence. So let's say our victim was shot. So we've got some bullets here, some shell casings here on the ground. So let's look at some of these shots. All right, the Voting Rights Act was ratified in 1965. So these attacks began immediately. South Carolina versus Katzenbach. The claim was that the Voting Rights Act was too aggressive. It was too aggressive, but the Supreme Court upheld the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act had only been in law, signed into law for a year, and that was the first attack. That was the first attack in 1966. Next, Shelby County v. Holder. This dismantled Section 4 and Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So the Supreme Court allowed Alabama, that was Shelby County, Alabama, versus Holder. Supreme Court allows Alabama to restrict voting and draw discriminatory district lines under state sovereignty. And I got states have the sovereign right to discriminate, question mark. Do they? What the Supreme Court said they did. So states have the sovereign right to discriminate. That was the ruling. And that is a bullet. South Carolina versus Katzenbach, that shot missed. But Shelby County v. Holder, that shot hit. So that is a wounding shot. So with Voting Rights Act, not dead yet, but injured, damaged, reduced. In 2021, we had Brnovich versus the Democratic National Committee. So the state of Arizona is allowed to further restrict voting, and the rights of citizens to sue is reduced. The court held that the state's interests were greater than the people's right to vote. So wait a minute. Yes, that does say what I said. So the state's interests, when it comes to suppressing voters and voter discrimination, and basically politicians firing voters, the state's interests supersede people's right to vote. That was the ruling. That's another shot. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act weakened. I'm not making this up. I'm not making it up. This all happened 2026, Louisiana versus Calais. Government cannot use race as a determining factor for district lines. There must be current discriminatory activity. And I got here in all caps, the Voting Rights Act is dead. And the problem with this is that with all of the previous shots, you've gotten rid of the the formula for determining if there's discrimination. You eliminated pre-clearance for drawing district lines, and you weaken the ability to sue, so citizens can't sue. And now finally, you can't use race as a determining factor. So the Voting Rights Act dead. Now, this goes together with some recent activities in 2025, Executive Order 14281. Eliminate disparate impact. This further damages Section 2. So you have no more punishment for discrimination. This executive order does only one thing, which is protects racist activity. The court cannot see discrimination. I said see discrimination. So when you go to court with this stuff, you have to be able to prove it. So the formula that was used to get the numbers, now you can't use that anymore. You can't use that anymore. You've given the state the right to declare sovereignty and giving the state the right to reduce voters. Now, I mentioned the second victim. So even though the people aren't the direct target of these practices, the people are affected, the people's right to vote is affected. That's disparate impact, but now you can't use that anymore. So that's done. Also, through executive order, we block the right to sue. Through executive order, block the right to sue. So organizations like the NAACP or other civil rights organizations, they can't sue. Private citizens can't sue. Only the Justice Department can sue. So even though people are affected, you have no recourse. You have nothing. Combine that with destroying DEI, using colorblind legal philosophy. And I put ridiculous because it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous because if we were in a colorblind society and if color didn't matter, then the incident with Carmelo Anthony wouldn't have happened. The incident with the young man in Virginia and the Rick Child trial, where a store owner chased a young black kid 430 yards, shot him in the back, and claimed self-defense and was not convicted. So it's not a colorblind, we're not in a colorblind society. But that is the claim, that is what they're saying to justify killing the Voting Rights Act. And at the end, I got basically destroying the Voting Rights Act allows politicians to pick their voters. That's what it comes down to. We allow politicians to pick voters. Now, what's the motive for this crime? Why would this be done? So, equal sovereignty. One of the claims of the Jim Crow states, of the southern states who wanted to get rid of this stuff, was equal sovereignty. So the state is sovereign and it's protected under the Bill of Rights. States do have sovereign powers. But can the state use their sovereign power to fire voters? Is it okay? Supreme Court said it was okay. So they say the 14th Amendment is enough. They say the 14th, 15th Amendment is enough. Voting rights are protected. But the 14th, 15th Amendment, they were signed in the 1860s. That was the 1860s. Jim Crow started in the 1860s, 1870s, and continued to the 1960s, almost 100 years, 14th Amendment is not enough. That is not enough protection. Voting rights were suppressed. Voters were disenfranchised. After the 14th and 15th Amendment, it's not enough protection. We still needed the Voting Rights Act, but it still did. The burden of proof, intentional discrimination. And basically, this is ridiculous. Because the way these things are set up, you can't bring the evidence into court. You don't have a formula, so you can't use the formula to determine discrimination. You can't use disparate impact to prove discrimination. You can't stop racial gerrymandering of districts without intentional discrimination, but you can't bring the evidence in anyway. So basically, the protection of the Voting Rights Act is gone. It's gone. Finally, the Supreme Court simply refused to enforce the Voting Rights Act. And as a result, politicians can fire their voters. And that's our motive for this crime. Those are our motives for this crime. So politicians can fire voters. Now, we're back to our crime scene. Now I know, let me come back on screen for a second. But I know, some of y'all were thinking, this, you may think I misled you and this is not a crime, but even though the Voting Rights Act is not an actual crime, it's not an actual murder, Voting Rights Act is still dead. Voting Rights Act is still dead. There's still been a negative impact. There's still been disparate impact. There's still been violation of voting rights. And now our protection is gone. And the thing is, some people have been making some noise about it. Some people, there's been a little bit of outrage, but not enough. Not enough. Not enough outrage to match the level of this crime. And this was a cold-blooded, premeditated, first-degree murder. Any way you slice it, Voting Rights Act is just as dead, even if it wasn't a real person, even if this is just a literal or figurative murder, it was still a killing. There has been a killing, and as a result, all of our rights are reduced. Our voting rights are unprotected, and that's gonna and that's going to continue unless we can get out to vote. That's why voting is so important, and it is essential that we vote. That's why this is so important. And for my last slide, we got voting rights in the cemetery. That's the end. RIP, the Voting Rights Act. All right. Well, I hope y'all found this informative. I know it's a little bit of a different format, and I apologize for my mic earlier in this session, but thank you all for bearing with me, and thank you for tuning in. And also, please come over, check us out on YouTube. We're trying to build our YouTube channel, so I welcome you to come on over to YouTube, subscribe, and also come back, join us next week for our workshop on next week. Thank y'all for tuning in. Good night.